So good afternoon, everyone. I just want to say thank you for joining us here today. My name is Megan Williams. I'm the Director of Support Services at AGI. If you're joining us for the first time, Alzheimer Group supports people who are living with dementia and their families through therapeutic activities, counseling, and support groups. We also provide education workshops to learn more about the disease. Today's lecture is being made possible by the generous support of the Lindsay Memorial Foundation. AGI is a charitable organization and we rely on the support of donations. This is a free lecture, but you are welcome to donate at any time by calling us or visiting our website. Our contact information will be sent to you.
Sorry, guys.
Email. Karen, you're not on mute. Via
I know, and I'm sorry.
along with your YouTube link where you can find recording of today's lecture and past lectures. Just a few housekeeping items. Please keep yourself on mute. And if you need to step out at any time, you will get a copy of the recording. Without further ado, let's begin today's lecture. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Karen Dureau, art therapist and counselor at Alzheimer Group, who will be talking about helping children understand dementia.
All right. Hi, everybody. How are you? Nice to see everybody. We're a little group. I know we have more that are registered, but we'll just let them in as we go along. My name is Karen, if you don't already know me. So I am the person who many years ago developed our intergenerational program at AGI. So I did a fair amount of research on talking to children about dementia, what we were going to put into our program. This is a program where we go in and speak to children in grades 4 to 6 about what dementia is, answer their questions, try and demystify it a little bit, and then we have them come into our day program when we're running our day program, obviously, and do an art party with us. I see something's flashing at the top. Oh,
Karen,
I have a chat. Okay.
Karen, I
change my sharing view. What does that mean?
I see your notes, so it looks a little bit, I'm not sure, does everyone
else? Oh, how do you see my notes?
That's see your
so
notes.
Weird. Okay. Let me figure out how to get that away. All right. Do you see my notes still?
Yeah.
Not very exciting. So you don't want to see them. All right. I apologize for that. So the reason that I was asked to do this presentation is because I'm the one that developed this program. I developed it with lots of input from people who know more about talking with children and education than I do. I just want to be careful at the beginning to let you know that I'm not presenting myself here as an expert in child education. And it's a little intimidating because I know we have at least one teacher. I think we have 2 teachers in the audience. So please jump in if I'm suggesting anything that you feel like is a little iffy. I'm trying to play it safe. Partly I'm talking because I do the teaching in the school some of the time, and partly because I have my own kids who have been learning about dementia basically since they're born. These are my daughters years ago when they were much littler than they are now, visiting in our day center, and these 2 ladies have become ladies that they consider friends. Yeah, I've been talking to my children very openly about dementia since they were babies. You know, I have one child that's very interested and engaged and really enjoys spending time in the day center, and one child that's maybe a little bit less interested and a little bit shyer and doesn't necessarily want to come and is not as interested in learning about dementia, but she at least has to know the basics. You know, different children, obviously it's going to be different. My older daughter knows far more about dementia than my younger daughter, not because there's particularly difference in age, but because it's a difference in level of interest. But I try hard to give them enough information that they're both comfortable, they both know what dementia is, neither one of them is freaked out by it, anything like that. All right. So, you know, as they've grown up, I've been adapting how we talk about dementia and what we say. what I say and the vocabulary I use so that it's age appropriate. My rule of thumb, talking to my own kids about dementia, but also when I go into classrooms, I try and open the lines of communication. I give them basic information, and then I invite them to ask me questions. And I think of it, has anybody ever heard of the sex ed rule, where when you talk to kids about sex, you answer the questions they ask honestly, but you don't have to feel like you have to be going beyond the question that they've asked. That's kind of how I approach talking to my children about dementia. When they ask me a question, when they bring up a concern, I address that question and I address that concern. But at the same time, I don't need to bombard them with information about treatment and prognosis and things like that. When they ask about those things, I'm honest. If they don't ask about those things, I stay with them where they are. Okay? Make sense? All
Please
right.
feel, please feel free to use the chat at the bottom of your screen if you have questions, and we will answer them at the end of the lecture.
So in talking to my own kids, because obviously the intergenerational program, it's all kids in the same age range, grades 4 to 6. But talking to my own kids as they've grown up, I've sort of shifted my focus. So when they were smaller, when they were the age they are in the picture, we really talked about the here and now. If I noticed them notice a behavior, I would talk to them about that behavior and what it meant and about why the person might be acting that way. But I wouldn't be talking about things that they hadn't noticed themselves. So it was very much in the here and now at that time. Now that they're older, we might talk a little bit beyond that, right? Because they ask more questions about that. And when you talk to a teenager, again, I'm anticipating that there'll be even more questions that go deeper into the causes and the prognosis and the treatments and things like that. Okay. So I don't push, and I don't give all the information all at once. I think it's really important that we kind of pick our moments. And, when it comes to, when we go in and do a presentation in a school, we give like one big presentation all at once because they're in school and that's what they're expecting. But I think at home, giving the information in little drips and drabs, like, oh, I think the child might need this information now, or anticipating that they might need to know this coming up. That might be how I will do it more. So little 2, 3, 4, 5-minute conversations. Megan was mentioning to me before the presentation that with her kids, it comes up a lot. In my household too, we talk about dementia probably once a week. We don't have really long conversations about it, but it'll come up, the kids will make an observation or, um, ask how somebody's doing or relate something else that they've observed to what they know about dementia. So for example, if they have a child in their class who is on the autism spectrum and behaves in a certain way, they might say, is that like when somebody with dementia does this or that? Like, so for them, talking about dementia is just kind of everyday conversation. And I think that's kind of nice. I think that children benefit from understanding a whole spectrum of aging and life. I think that as in general, we don't talk about dementia enough. And I think that what you don't talk about becomes scary, right? So the more we talk about it, the less scary it is. All right. So that's my introduction about why it's me doing this talk. And for some reason, my slide, there we go. All right, didn't want to switch. All right, so the presentation overview, I'm going to start with just giving you some tips and guiding principles that I use when talking to children, whether it's my own children or classes of children. Then I'm going to talk about specifically the resources that we've developed for grades 4 to 6, which is an age, I think, where children are really noticing the behaviors of people around them who have dementia. And it's a wonderful age where children are really interested in learning things and not judgmental, which is wonderful, you know? So when you explain something to a child and you normalize that thing, they adapt to it very, very well. In all of the years that we've been doing the intergenerational program, when we developed that program, I would say 12 years ago. It was before my oldest daughter was born, so it's a long time ago, and we've been doing it year after year in multiple schools. We've never really had a bad experience. The children that we've taught about dementia who have come and been invited to spend time with our clients who have dementia have been, for the most part, to be quite honest, more sensitive, more respectful, and more engaging with the people living with dementia than the adults who accompany them. Kids are really good at this in general. Kids understand what it is to have a brain that's not quite working the same way as a typical adult's brain, and they take it in their stride, right? And so the children that we've worked with have been incredible, actually. And in general, when we give them some basic guidelines to help them understand the disease and know how to respond, they step up beautifully, and we can learn a lot from them. Okay. All right, and then we'll try and save a little bit of time for your questions at the end. All right, so step one, guiding principles, things to keep in mind when you're talking to children about dementia. The first thing is to be age appropriate. Now, I think that, when we're with children that we spend a fair amount of time with, we might do this naturally, but as long as we don't overthink it, right? Like you don't want to over prepare so that you're like, a preschool age child doesn't need to hear about plaques and tangles, right? With preschool age children, we want to keep things short and sweet. We might talk for a minute or two, and then the child's going to wander off and do something else because we have to respect that child's short attention span, right? Preschool age children, I find, sometimes we're ready to tell them this big thing that's happening, and they're like, yeah, okay, I noticed that. Right? Grandpa forgets. Oh, okay. Well, I know grandpa forgets. What else? Right? So be short and sweet. Focus on the things that the child can see for themselves, right? So have you noticed that grandpa asks you your name over and over and over again? Let's talk about why grandpa does that. Or have you noticed that grandpa gets irritable when you're noisy? Let's talk about why grandpa doesn't tolerate the noise so much, right? So we want to keep it to what are the things that the child has noticed or that the child can easily notice when you bring your attention to it, as opposed to talking about the disease in general. Okay. We want to keep things in the now. So we want to talk about things that that is happening with the person now that they're observing now. And by that, I mean, we don't want to talk about what's coming up necessarily. So we don't necessarily want to worry with the child right now about, you know, grandma's going to get worse over time. We're not talking about how it's terminal. We're not talking about how it's progressive. What we're doing is explaining to the child what the child is experiencing right now. Now, obviously, if the child asks, but the reality is preschool children aren't going to ask in general unless they're getting a little bit older about, well, what's going to happen in the future, right? Because just like a person living with dementia who doesn't have a super well functioning frontal lobe that doesn't consider the future, children at the preschool age also are very much living in the right now, and that's what we want to focus on. Okay, so we want to contextualize it with what the child already knows. I remember when my kids were this age, they went to a daycare, and both of them had a child in daycare who was on the autism spectrum. So they had already heard from their daycare teachers, and I had already explained to them that some people's brains work differently than their brains. I was always very careful not to put a judgment on that just your brain is different from this person's brain, and we want to respect how everybody's brain is working, right? And so the way I would explain dementia to them at that time was in the context of what they already knew about atypical brains, right? I have one daughter who wears glasses. And we used to sometimes talk about, you know, children with ADHD needing glasses for their brains. That's how we sort of explained why some people need extra help, right? She needs the extra help of wearing glasses. Other people may need the extra help of us behaving in a different way. It's like glasses for the brain. So that's also a way that we contextualized dementia, so that it's a, well, okay, some people have different needs than I have, and we just try and meet everybody's needs as best we can. Okay. So when it comes to preschool children, we want to give them simple rules to follow. Okay. And those rules are, of course, based on the needs of the person that they're spending time with, right? Um, and sometimes, you know, we hesitate to put expectations on the child. But I actually think it's good for children to have to adapt their behavior sometimes for the people around them, because the people around them also have special needs, right? So it's okay to say, you know, grandma can't take loud noises, you know, because her brain is different from other people's brains. So when we're near grandma, you have to be quieter. You have to use your indoor voice. And if you can't use your indoor voice, then I'm going to tell you to go play outside. It's okay to be very clear about, this is what we need you to do when you're in the presence of this person, because this is what their needs are. Okay. Having said that, of course, it's your job to supervise and to step in. What I used to do is rehearse with my kids, like if they were coming to visit in the activity center, before we stepped in the room, they had a little mantra, right? I can't remember what the activity center mantra was, but I used to have mantras for all kinds of things. Like when we went to a store, they had 3 rules. And before we walked into the store, they had to remind me what the 3 rules were. They were: stay close to mommy, don't touch, and I can't remember what the third one is because my kids are getting old now, right? But before, every time we went into store, they told me what the 3 rules were. They were simple, they were short and sweet, and they were things they could follow. And if they broke the rule, in that moment that they broke the rule, I would tell them, I would stop them, I would remove them from the situation, and I would say, which rule did you break? Now, do you want to try it again? Okay. So it's simple. If they broke a rule, it wasn't a punishment, right? In the activity center, we sometimes have rules like keep your bum in your chair as much as you can, right? Use your indoor voice, um, things like that, right? So very simple, easy to follow, straightforward rules are great. Now, the rules are going to be different for a 2-year-old than for a 5-year-old, but the principle is the same, right? Keep it short, keep it sweet, and don't be afraid to remove the child if it's not going well, okay? We want to use simple language, right? We don't want to worry too much about, you know, we don't want to use, you know, it's okay to use the word Alzheimer or use the word dementia with children. I always use those words. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. We don't want to stigmatize the words, right? But we don't have to use really complicated language either, right? We can talk about, you know, the brain and not neurons, right? So, you know, we simplify our language. We try not to make it too complicated, okay? And you know, it's for all of the ages. We don't, we want to try and provide things for the child and the person living with dementia to do. And we want to point out to the child things that they can do together, because we want to keep it positive, right? Yes, we need to talk about rules and things that they shouldn't do, but we definitely want to encourage them to fully have a relationship and do the things that they can do with the person, okay? And, you know, I think setting up an activity is really important, right? I mean, now when my kids visit the activity center, they might just do the activities that are already going on, right? When they were littler and they visited the activity center, it would be, okay, you're going to come to the activity center and you're going to sing a song and then you're going to go, right? Or you're going to come to the activity center, we're going to deliver the cookies that you baked and then we're going to go, right? Like, so it's okay when they're little like this to keep the interactions short and sweet too, right? I always figure keep them wanting more, you know? Any questions so far? No, we're good? All right, so let's talk about school-age children. We're going to talk in detail about school-age children in the second part because I'm going to sort of go over what we say in our program. But again, we want to respect the child's interest and attention span. Like I said, of my two kids, I have one child who's very, very interested. And loves to come to work with mommy and loves to know all about the details of what's happening in people's brains and how to respond. And she just likes it. She's interested. I have another daughter who wants to know the basics and not to be bothered with the rest. Got to respect that. Everybody's got their interests, right? But my little one knows that there are rules that she has to follow and there's a basic level of respect, whether she has an interest in, you know, it's just like some kids want to spend a lot of time with their grandparents and some don't, right? So, but you still have to be respectful and you still have to follow the rules, right? I always, when I talk to kids about dementia, I start simple with basic information, the kind of things that we're going to talk about in the next part. And then I answer their questions as honestly as I can. Okay. I give the child a vocabulary. That's a big difference between older kids and the little ones. School-age children feel good when they have names for things. Okay, they're in the age range where they like to label things. It makes them feel secure. So if they have a name for a behavior, it can be really helpful, right? So not just naming it the dementia, which is really important, right? But also naming some of the symptoms, like, you know, sometimes grandpa has something called anxiety. It means that he worries a lot. Or, you know, Aunt Kathy has a problem with something called impulse control. That's why if you're in the bathroom and she has to go, she might bang on the door and yell for you to get out, right? If you give a name for the behavior, it demystifies it a little bit and it makes it less scary. Okay. Again, we're going to give a basic set of rules for interaction, but this time we're going to explain why the rules are necessary. Okay, because school-age children are far more likely, in my experience anyway, with my kids, they're way more likely to follow the rules if they agree to why the rules are in place. Okay, if something isn't understood, explain it in different words and give an example. Okay, and at this age, based on our interactions in the schools, one of the questions we almost always get is, does it hurt? So I think it's really important at this age to reassure school-age children that no, Alzheimer's disease doesn't hurt. You feel normal pretty much most of the time. Sometimes it's frustrating, but it doesn't physically hurt. Okay, I think that's really important. Children at this age will start to worry about the welfare of the person living with dementia, which is wonderful, right? But we want to make sure that they understand that, you know, that they're not building it up or imagining things in their minds. Okay. All right. And teenagers, I gotta say, I don't have teenagers. So I have a teenage niece and nephew. But I don't have a huge amount of insight into talking with teenagers. I must admit, I know some of you probably are much better than I am. In terms of teenagers, my feeling is be prepared to answer questions about things like prognosis and treatment, right? Answer honestly, right? Also, you know, going where the child needs to go in terms of emotional reactions is really important, you know, and let the teenager know what he or she can do to help, right? Because very often feeling in control can make you feel a lot more secure. Feeling like you can do something to make the situation better can be really helpful, but also be cautious about unrealistic expectations. So you know, teenagers can help, but they can't fix this. They can't make it go away, right? And they're still egocentric, right? Egocentric means that they may feel that they have some kind of agency in what's happening, to the person living with dementia. So it's their fault, or they should be able to make it better, or what they're doing is making it worse. And it's really important to be open about that, okay? And we don't want to overburden teenagers with responsibility. You know, sometimes teenagers, it feels like they're growing up and are able to handle it, but kids should get to be kids. You know, it's okay if kids want to help, but we have to remember who the primary caregiver is, and teenagers can be helpers but not caregivers, or shouldn't be caregivers. Okay. All right. So when you're talking to kids, pick your moment. Okay. You need to think about your mood, right? You don't want to be talking to children and trying to explain the disease if you've just had a big crisis and you're really upset. You've just had the diagnosis and you can't talk about it without sobbing, right? I mean, take care of yourself and then talk to the children, right? I mean, we need to be in a headspace where we can talk calmly and be honest and truthful, and we have to be ready to do that, right? You need to not be in a bad mood, right? There's all kinds of reasons why we might say this is not a good moment in terms of my mood. And we want to respect that and make sure that you are modeling to the child a positive attitude about this as much as possible. Okay. You want to look at the child's mood. There's lots of times when it's not a good idea to talk to the kids. And sometimes that's the moment where we really think we should. Okay. Pay attention to what the child is doing when you introduce the topic. I know I, for one, sometimes want to have a serious conversation about my kids about something. They're not in trouble, but if I tell them turn off the TV or put away the video game or stop playing with your dolls or whatever it is that they're enjoying, really doesn't matter what I talk to them about. They're going to think that it's a punishment just having the conversation, right? So we want to pick a moment where the child isn't being pulled away, isn't feeling punished by having this conversation. And in my experience, the best moments to have these conversations is when we're already doing something together. Okay, so if it's something that we're doing that doesn't require a lot of concentration. So these conversations in my household often happen, you know, if we're coloring together or doing art together. If we're walking the dog together, we have a lot of dog walking conversations. My dog just poked up his head like, oh, she said WALK, sorry. So we have a lot of conversations then. When we're getting ready for bed, you know, we're reading a story, it might follow from after story time. If we're having dinner together, if we're doing a puzzle together, those shared activities are a great time to talk about things, and the activity takes the pressure off the conversation, right? So that's a tip that I think is really helpful whenever you have to talk to kids about something important, but especially then. Okay. All right. One thing about talking to kids about dementia is that it gives us an opportunity to model for the child good coping to hard feelings. Okay. We don't always have to, we want to be in a good frame of mind when we're talking to children about dementia. We want to be calm, we want to be relaxed, but at the same time, there's no need for us to hide the fact that this is a topic that makes us feel sad or frightened, or sometimes that it makes us feel angry that we have to deal with it, right? It's okay for children to see that we experience a whole world of emotions when we have a loved one who's sick. And what we want to do is normalize that it's okay to have all those feelings, right? I mean, the line I always use with my kids is there are no bad feelings, but there are bad behaviors, right? You can feel any way you want to feel, but you can't always act the way you want to act. We have to find good behaviors to match our feelings, not destructive behaviors, right? So you can be angry that grandpa has dementia. It's not fair that grandpa can't remember your name, right? Grandpa should be able to remember your name, and it's okay to be mad that your grandpa doesn't remember your name. Is it okay to kick grandpa in the shins? No, right? So feelings are fine. Not all behaviors are okay. And I think it's important to make that distinction to children and to also let children into your own emotional experience to some degree. Let them know what works for you in coping and talk to them if they've witnessed you coping poorly, right? Because sometimes okay, maybe we don't kick grandpa in the shins, but maybe we yelled at grandpa. We feel really bad about it. So we're going to model to them, one, apologizing to grandpa, whether grandpa remembers it or not, we still have to apologize, right? And we need to talk to them about the plan we're making inside of us to not yell at grandpa again. What am I going to do the next time I get mad at grandpa? Am I going to walk out of the room? Am I going to take a deep breath? Am I going to, my favorite one for anger in kids is holding up my hand and having them blow out the candles that are my fingers. Am I going to blow out my own finger candles? What am I going to do to manage my own feelings the next time it happens? Okay, so this is a great opportunity for children to learn good coping strategies for their feelings that they will take with them their whole lives. Okay. We want to help children name the feelings that they're feeling too. And sometimes they might not want to name it the name that we normally give it. So for example, I have one daughter who doesn't like the word anxiety. I've named the word anxiety for her, but she doesn't like it. She prefers to call it the wrongsies. It just feels more accurate to her. And that's fine because she knows what the wrongsies are. We've talked about what that feeling is. And that's like a mutual label we have for the feeling of anxiety. It's called the wrongsies between her and I. Okay. But we want to give children the names for their feelings, because when we name feelings, we show them that it's okay. You're not the only one who gets the wrongsies. Lots of people get the wrongsies. Okay. And this is a normal thing to go through, and you'll get the wrongsies many times in your life. And you're going to learn how to cope with it. And you might not enjoy having that feeling, but you're going to know what to do when it comes. Okay. So that leads me to helping children find strategies that work for them, right? Sometimes children will notice things and come to their own conclusions about what they mean. Okay, so behaviors that the person has, for example, if the child was noisy and their grandparent yelled at them, they might think that that means their grandparent doesn't like them, and then they're afraid that their grandparent might do something to them or what. We don't want to dismiss those fears. We don't want to say, don't be ridiculous. Grandpa would never hurt you, right? We want to talk with them about where that fear comes from. When we want to explain the behaviors, but we don't want to just dismiss the fear, okay? We want to validate whatever feeling the child brings to us, okay? And we want to do regular emotional check-ins. When my kids visit in our day center, on the way down the hall to the elevator, I always do a check-in. How did you feel about that visit? Did you notice anything? Do you have any questions about? How do you feel? Are you feeling happy, excited, sad, nervous, shy, right? What's going on with you? That's a great time to sort of have check-ins, and very often those conversations about dementia will come from that. Okay. All right. When it comes to talking with children, this one is really, really, really important. Don't make promises you can't keep. Okay. Sometimes we're tempted because we want the child to feel better. Sometimes we want to make them promises. Things like, grandpa is never going to miss one of your birthdays because it's so important to him to celebrate your birthday with you that even though he has dementia, he's never going to miss a birthday. Well, the reality is we don't know that, right? Grandpa might miss a birthday someday, right? We can't say grandma's never going to live in a nursing home. We might have the intention that grandma's going to age at home, but we can't tell the future, right? And when you make promises that you can't keep, you lose trust with the child, okay? Because believe me, children remember those promises, okay? Everything won't necessarily be fine all of the time. It might happen that you'll miss an event because you have to take care of your loved one who has dementia. And that's not fun and it's not nice, but we don't want to promise something that we're going to have to renege on later on, okay? All right. And the last tip I have is that we have to lighten up a little bit too, right? If we talk about dementia only in a doom and gloom way, the child will learn that having dementia is an unmitigatingly terrible thing to happen to someone. And, it's nothing but negativity as related to the person who has dementia in their life. And we want them to have a positive relationship with that person, right? So we have to be positive too. We need to know where hope lies, right? And sometimes that's going to take a little while for you because you really genuinely have to know where it is. When somebody's been diagnosed with a terminal progressive illness, I know it's hard to find hope, but we all have to know where we can find it. And the hope lies in the now, right? In those moments that we can really enjoy together. It lies in having all of those positive moments strung together until the person is experiencing a good quality of life. The hope lies in the opportunity to have a good relationship with the person while they're with us, right? And sometimes we have to laugh, right? We don't want to laugh at the person living with dementia. That's not respectful, right? But it's okay to laugh. Sometimes funny stuff happens, right? And we don't always want to be serious about everything, okay? All right, so that's the end of part 1. Anybody have any questions so far? All right, do my teachers want to add anything? I see my teacher smiling. All right. All right, so I'm gonna, in this part of the presentation, I'm not gonna go into every little thing in great detail, but what I wanna do is basically show you the presentation that we give in grades 4 to 6. We tweak it depending on the grade, 4, 5, or 6. So this is the grade 4 presentation I'm showing you. And I'm basically going to tell you the words that we use and why, and very briefly tell you why we say what we say, okay? Megan's telling me I have 20 minutes left. Oh, Stephanie's a high school guidance counselor. Oh, that's even more intimidating. So I have 2 teachers and a high school guidance counselor. I'm awfully glad I glossed over the teenagers, I have to say, no pressure at all.
I didn't tell you that before we started. I didn't tell you that information before we started.
All right, so I'm just an art therapist and a mom.
Keep going, 20 minutes, go.
All right, 20 minutes. All right, so opening the lines of communication. I usually start with, have you ever noticed a senior, the person that you're talking about might be behaving oddly, okay, in a different way from other adults, okay? So have you ever noticed that the person forgets, or that the person says things that adults don't usually say, or the person does things that adults don't usually do? This is a really interesting way to open up the conversation because you get a great idea of what the child has noticed, right? So it gives you the starting point to the conversation from them, okay? Now we name the illness, okay? This person has Alzheimer's disease. Have you ever heard of it before? What have you heard about it? It's amazing how young children have heard about Alzheimer's disease and the stigmas that go along with it. And it's really important for you to know what the child knows or has wrong already, okay? And then we explain to them that Alzheimer's is an illness that makes it difficult to remember or to organize your thoughts, okay? Now here is absolutely crucial information, okay? If I was teaching this to a child who was younger than grade 4, or even the grade 4 kids, I might even get them to repeat this back to me, okay? 1, senior citizens get Alzheimer's, children can't get it, okay? 2, it's not contagious, okay? And 3, people who have it didn't do anything to get it, and nobody around them did anything either. It's just bad luck, because that's the problem with the egocentrism again, right? Children often think if something bad happened to somebody in my life, I must have somehow caused it, okay? All right, this is the vocabulary list that we give children in elementary school, okay? We tell them, you know, we very specifically give them words and tell them what they need. So for example, if they hear an adult talking about the disease and using these words, it demystifies them. If you're talking about neurons and you don't know, if the child overhears you and they don't know what a neuron is, your conversation might sound a lot scarier to them than it actually is. So knowing what dementia means, Alzheimer's means, what a senior is, we tell them not to call people old people. We tell them to use the word senior, okay? We explain what we mean by confused in context of dementia. We talk about what it is to be frail, to have memory loss, to be forgetful, anxiety, neurons. We want to make sure they understand what these words mean, okay? And then we talk about how brains can get sick too, okay? Now, this is a lovely little coloring page we have. You can get all kinds of versions of this online, I'm sure, okay? We talk about symptoms. So we say, look, this brain has a cold. Now, Alzheimer's is not a cold, but sometimes you get a cold. What are your symptoms when you have a cold? Okay, we get the child to name all of the symptoms that they experience when they have a cold. Then we explain to them, well, when you have Alzheimer's, you have symptoms of that too. And these are some of the symptoms, okay? Confusion, forgetting, impulsiveness. We explain what that means, coordination problems, all of this list of symptoms, okay? Now, I always, when I get to this point, I remind the child that a cold is contagious, but Alzheimer's is not contagious, okay? So they can get a cold and they can catch it from somebody else, but they can't catch Alzheimer's. But like a cold, Alzheimer's has symptoms, okay? So to give them an idea of what symptoms are. And I explain each one of these symptoms in a way that they can relate to, okay? So for example, when I explain impulsiveness, I'm not going to go through each one, but when I explain impulsiveness in grade 4, they love this. I always tell them a story about something I did when I was in grade 4. When I was in grade 4, I went into my bathroom and my mother had just washed the towel and it was lying on the towel rack and her lipstick was lying on the counter. And I don't know why, but I picked up the lipstick and I drew a giant letter K in lipstick on the freshly washed towel. Now, I always tell them that I must have been a slightly stupid child because I wrote my own initials, so it wasn't like my mother couldn't figure out who did it. And when she caught me, she asked me why I did it, and I had no answer. And the reason I had no answer was because I did it without even thinking about it. I was impulsive, right? When you explain impulsivity that way, kids are like, oh, I've done stuff like that, right? So when we explain the symptoms, if we can help the child relate to this symptom, impulsivity is one that's easy for kids to relate to, right? It really helps them get what the behavior is, okay? All right. Then I talk to the child about becoming a dementia detective, okay? And this is a step sometimes people don't take. But if you're with a child who's going to be spending time with a person living with dementia, we have to make sure the child understands that the person living with dementia might not be able to tell them if something's bothering them, okay? So very often we get situations and scenarios where, for example, children are getting really noisy and the person living with dementia, the anxiety is building up and building up and building up. But the person living with dementia doesn't have a good way to express, I need you to calm down, right? And so they might yell at the child, okay? So what we want to do is teach children to pay just a little bit more attention to the person living with dementia than they might pay to another person, okay? Another adult in their life, okay? Just like if they're spending time with a younger child, we would expect that it was their job to pay attention to where that child was and what they were doing so they didn't bother or hurt that younger child, we expect them to just pay a little bit more attention to what the person living with dementia is doing. And I might show the child a picture like this to say, listen, you already know how to do this. Look at this picture of this lady. And with your detective lens on, what do you think you know about this lady? Right? So the child might say she's not happy, she looks like she has a headache, she looks really grumpy, whatever it is. You know, you can ask the child, why do you think that? And you can talk about how you see the expression on her face, you can see her gesture, the way she's holding herself, right? You can ask the child to imagine what sound might this lady be making, right? We want to teach children that they actually do have the ability to use their empathy and to use their curiosity and to look and to see what's going on with the person. Now, you know, and I know that it's really your job to be monitoring what's going on with the person, but it doesn't hurt for the child to understand that you can understand ways of communicating that go beyond just what the grown-up says to you. The grown-up might do things as well that you can understand. Okay? All right. Now, when I talk to kids about dementia, I always talk to them about frailty. Now, frailty is not necessarily a symptom of dementia, although some coordination problems are, right? But I think it's important because obviously aging and dementia and frailty all go hand in hand. It's important that children understand that the person living with dementia might have physical needs that they have to respect in order for that person to be safe, right? So this is an image I show when we go into grade 4 classes. And I ask the children, what do you, just putting on your detective lens, what do you know about this man? They'll notice his cane, the fact that he's in a bathrobe, the fact that he's wearing glasses, and I ask them to come to conclusions about what his needs are. So if he's using a cane, how fast do you think he can walk? And they'll tell me he can't walk very fast at all. And then I'll follow it up with, well, do you think that if he can't walk fast, what should you do? Can he keep up with you? So if you want to be with this man, what do you have to do? You have to slow down, right? If this person is wearing glasses, maybe they don't see as well as other people, right? So what might you have to do, right? So I ask them to take a look at this, what they can see, because we want to keep it to what's observable as much as possible, and draw their own conclusions about what they should do in response, okay? All right. Really, talking to children about dementia is an exercise in teaching children to be sensitive to other people, right? Now, we don't necessarily expect them to be good at it yet, but it's never a bad thing to teach children to be sensitive, right? And to pay attention to others and what other people's needs are, okay? So we're growing good humans by doing this too, right? All right. So I do talk to children a very little bit about brain changes, and my goal here is not for them to go into the details of how brains change, but to explain to them why is it that sometimes a person with dementia can do something 1 minute and can't do something the next. Because if it's a child who's spending a significant amount of time with a person living with dementia, they're going to notice how inconsistent things are. So I always talk about the neuron. I use an analogy of a lamp with a loose cord. Sometimes the electricity connects and sometimes it doesn't, right? I ask the kids, what would happen if we cut the cord? Well, it wouldn't work at all, right? But what if the cord was just all gunked up, right? You say, well, the brain cell in a person with dementia is like that gunked up cord. Sometimes it's going to work and sometimes it's not, okay? All right. The thing that's most important for kids to take away from that, though, is that if a person is having a bad moment or a bad day, it's nobody's fault. Okay. The person with dementia can't make it work better. The child can't do something that made it worse or will make it better. It's just the neurons are not making their connections that day. Okay. Put a lot of emphasis on making sure that children understand that they're not responsible for the behavior of the person living with dementia. Okay. All right. So this is my basic list of rules. It's my do's and don'ts. Okay. And of course, they're going to be tweaked depending on who the child is spending time with. Okay. But these are the sort of the basics that we use in the activity center. 1, don't mention memory loss or dementia or Alzheimer's disease unless the person brings it up. Okay. And I use an example in with the grade 4 kids of, imagine you had just like the biggest, giantest pimple on your chin. And all day long, everybody you met wanted to point out your pimple, right? You would start to feel really bad about your appearance. You would think, oh my God, am I just a pimple? Right? So we don't want people to always be reminded that they have dementia or that they forgot something, because we don't always have to point it out. It's going to happen a lot. So we can just give people information, right? Do tell the person with dementia all about things that you enjoy, right? Don't tell the person living with dementia that he or she is being repetitive, but answer the question like it's the first time you heard it so that the person doesn't feel bad. Kids are amazingly good at this. Kids are better at dealing with repetition than adults, because kids actually like repetition, right? Adults, it'll drive them crazy, and kids are like, okay, I'm going to tell you my name again. Oh, I'll tell you I'm in grade 4 and I like soccer for the 50th time. No problem, because it doesn't bother me to be repetitive. Kids are great about repetition, okay? Don't be offended if the person forgets your name. It doesn't mean that they're not interested in spending time with you, okay? But do introduce yourself and let the person know why you're there, okay? So we get the kids to rehearse, it's Karen, I'm here to do art with you, as opposed to, do you know who I am, okay? And name tags are great. A lot of kids won't mind putting on a name tag when they know why, right? So if that's an issue, stick a name tag on the kid. Okay. And again, be careful around people who are frail. Don't jump, don't run, don't jostle the person. Okay. And what I really like to say for kids coming to our activity center is the rule is keep your bum in your chair. Only get up if you absolutely have to get up. Otherwise, bums in chairs. Okay. All right. And then we want to keep this, that's sort of the basic starting point information we give kids. And then we want to check in regularly. We want to take note of new behaviors that the child might have witnessed, and we want to explain what's happened as we go along, okay? And we don't want to whisper about the disease in secretive ways that the child might overhear. If we're talking about the disease and the child is around, then the child should be included in the conversation, okay? All right, so now it's question time if you have any questions.
Thank you, Karen. Even though you don't have teenagers and you aren't necessarily a teacher, I think you are an expert in talking to kids about dementia. If anyone has any questions, you can write in the chat. I do have a couple questions that I just curious about how you would talk to kids. So boundaries for kids are a big factor. And I know that there are kids who really don't like to be touched.
Yeah.
Don't like to
have one of those.
Be pinched and so forth. So from your experience going into whether it's the activity center, having grandma or grandpa come by and want to keep giving you hugs and kisses because they're so cute and they love their grandkids, how would you politely encourage the children to
I have one child who eats that up and she just thinks that's great, and I swear that's 90% of the reason why she goes, because she just wants to be fawned over. But my younger daughter is quite shy and she really doesn't want to be touched, and I've taught her, you just go and quietly remove yourself from the situation. If something's making you, she's not required to let somebody touch her, but she doesn't have to be rude about it or make it an issue. Normally, if it was a person without dementia, she might say something like, I don't want to be touched, right? But she knows that in our activity center, if somebody's reaching out to touch her, it's okay to take a step away. Right? It's okay to just step away. And if she's worried, she can just leave the room. And she often does do that, actually. When she's at the activity center, she'll often just go into the kitchen and close the door. And it's not her thing. She doesn't want to be fawned over. She's very shy. So she'll just quietly remove herself from the situation. And that's fine. One thing I try very hard to do is to respect that she needs that boundary and not to try and coax her out. Right?
And sometimes I guess having something in between them might also help. So
Yeah,
you might,
across a table she's
yeah.
comfortable with. Something I find really interesting is just the other day she asked me if she could be part of a Zoom activity group because she really enjoyed interacting with our clients over Zoom because nobody could touch her. I thought that was really interesting. She said, "Can we do the art activity again?" And I thought, wow, because we were doing like an art appreciation. And she thought it was really fun and interesting. And it wasn't the fact that, you know, what makes her uncomfortable is not the fact that people have dementia, it's that everybody wants to touch her and talk to her and she's shy. So, you know, I think it's important to respect kids' characters too, you know, and tell them what to do in that uncomfortable situation. Because otherwise she would freeze like a deer in headlights, you know.
Yeah. What
Yeah.
also, another question, Karen, which comes a lot. So sometimes people with dementia, they have difficulty with their words. Sometimes they have nonsensical talk, or sometimes they just don't stop talking. And, you know, kids are sometimes attentive, but depending on the age, they're not interested in what grandma or grandpa is going to say. And they're just like, they want to go off and do their own thing. How could they kind of do that without being seen as rude, because a person with dementia doesn't understand their social cues?
Yeah, I think as the adult, I would probably encourage a shared activity in a situation like that. So for example, I might pull out a balloon and blow it up and get them doing a physical activity that's maybe going to curb the talking a little bit. But you know, I think teaching kids to listen for at least a period of time respectfully, there's nothing wrong with that. Explaining to the child, you know, this person, their words get mixed up, you know, from their brain to their mouth, the words get all mixed up, and they sometimes come out wrong. That's why we talk about being a detective, right? You can try and figure out what the person's saying in other ways, right? Making it, well, not game, but making it kind of fun and positive to say, listen, he's trying to tell you something, right? Playing the repeat back game, right? So if you don't really know where a person's going, you can say back what they just said, right? And also, you know, when the child doesn't want to do it anymore, it's not their job. So it's okay for the child to say, excuse me, I gotta go, and leave.
Yeah.
Right? It's okay. It's right. They, you know, I think the most important thing is that for my kids, even when a person is sort of, even when the person with dementia is sort of not being conventionally polite, they still need to be polite. Doesn't mean they can't set boundaries. It doesn't mean that they're stuck and they can't leave a situation that makes them uncomfortable, but they don't have to be rude about it. They have to understand that the person living with dementia isn't necessarily doing it on purpose. So it's a fine line, right? Like my kids know that they would be in huge trouble if they said to somebody, you talk too much, I'm leaving. Right? But they also know they're not going to be in trouble if they say, you know what, I'm going to go get us some juice in the kitchen. I'll be back a little bit later. Or I have to go now, or whatever, right? As long as they're polite, it's okay.
Yeah,
It's okay to step away, you know?
absolutely. And I think it's giving them sometimes the tools to know what to say in those situations, especially reflecting on it. There is one question in the chat. So you talked a little bit about, you know, regularly checking in with kids,
Yep.
you know,
I don't see
asking
it.
them
That's
what
weird.
pardon? It's
Sorry.
okay. I'm going to tell you.
Okay.
But questions about their observations and things like that. But the question might be is how much do you push in terms of the checking in with kids and asking them their observations? So
I don't push a lot. I check in, I open the door, but I don't expect them to walk through it. Like 99% of the time, they don't walk through it because mommy's annoying. Mommy's always asking them how they're feeling, and most of the time the answer is fine. Right?
yeah,
But when you ask, you send the message that you care, even if they don't want to like take you up on the conversation.
yeah, and from my experience, because I have 2 young kids also, and I find that sometimes they will ask, or there's ways to bring it into the conversation when they're going through something else. So we can use it as examples, but kind of not necessarily directly.
Yeah, one thing that I'll often do is if I've noticed something that I thought made them uncomfortable, I might say, if I was in your position when so and so tried to give me a hug, I think I might have been a little bit uncomfortable. How did you feel? Right?
Yeah.
So it tells them it's okay if you were uncomfortable. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I think we have to give kids time to process, as said, and they are so smart and their brains are just working nonstop and they're piecing things together. So
and
they,
sometimes they surprise you, like I've said literally things like that. And my older daughter will say, she's very extroverted, and she'll say, well, that didn't make me uncomfortable. I liked it.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. And I really
so
believe
great.
they are picking up on our body language as well. So if we're uncomfortable with something, they might think, oh, should I be uncomfortable with that? Even though they might not be. So, let's keep them as kind of give them credit as well.
Yeah. I have to say one thing I didn't talk about in this because I was talking to children, but I have to say, in my experience, people living with dementia really step up in a big way when children are around. I'll give you an example. We have a lady who has very little impulse control. And she hugs and touches and kisses people without their permission all the time. One day, when my daughter was visiting in the activity center, she went up to my daughter, opened her arms, and said, wait a minute, is it okay with you if I give you a kiss? I was floored because in a million years, I didn't think this person would have had the impulse control to be able to ask the child for consent before she touched her. And we see things like that all the time. There's something really nice about having children around because it allows people to be adults.
Yeah.
When you have dementia, you often feel like you're put in the position of being a child, and a child will treat you like the adult that you are. And I find that, we really haven't had incidents in either direction where an adult was inappropriate or a child was inappropriate when we've done our intergenerational
Yeah,
program.
kids are curious. They want to know what it's about, but they want to do it in a safe way.
Yeah.
So, the other thing we're going to wrap up, but the other thing we didn't talk about are resources for books. Now, I
didn't because I'm not confident about it.
I just wanted to address it. We didn't put resources for books for kids because we have not looked at them, and we have not to really evaluate to see if it's appropriate or not.
I'll be 100% positive. I've yet to find one that I really, really liked.
Yeah.
So if you know of any books that you want to suggest to us that we read, let us know, because the ones that I've seen.
Yeah. So, and
the best one I've seen is the Pfizer one, where they tell you everything will be okay if you just give Grandpa this drug from Pfizer.
Okay, so the last thing I just want to say is that if ever you do have children or know of kids who need some, I guess, a counselor, someone to talk to them about dementia, you can always call AGI, and that's part of what we do. So please feel free to reach out. And check your email. You will get an evaluation for the end of the day, hopefully by the end of the day or tomorrow, about this lecture and the link for the YouTube. Karen, thank you so much. And I guess we're going to be a team for our next couple ones.
Oh, that's fun.
Okay, the next lecture.
I just have to say, before we go, Oliwa Derry, where have you been? We haven't seen you in like 2 years.
Okay, Karen, I'm going to stop.
Sorry, I'm happy to see a name from the